This is the Internet Court of Truth and Lies. Its purpose is if you find something in the media that you think is the truth or you think it's a lie, you can bring a dissection of what you believe to up to 8 jurors. The dissection you do is answering 8 verdict questions that are standard for any truth or lie. The jurors also provide their verdicts. There is no final verdict in these trials. There's dialogue, and the verdicts are never the perfect questions for the topic, but they're always very good at keeping people on topic, which is whether or not something is the truth or a lie. What happens as a result of this is everybody sees how everybody else thinks about something that's claimed. This trial today I call the Budapest Memorandum. It's a repeat of a trial that I ran about a year ago. I was personally curious what changed, because this is all about this thing called the Budapest Memorandum, which is where Russia assured Ukraine that they would never invade them or question the sovereignty of Ukraine if Ukraine would just give up all their nuclear weapons to Russia. As a result of that, Ukraine gave up all of their nuclear weapons to Russia. And less than 10 years later, Russia decided to destroy Ukraine, take it over, invade. The point of this is the truth of what Russia really is under Putin, it turns out in the past as well, is coming out very clearly. The Budapest Memorandum is an astounding document because it's so clear, it's so short and so clear that it is exchanging the nuclear weapons in possession of Ukraine for the promise by 4 countries that Ukraine will not be invaded or sovereignty questioned. This is such a short document that I'm going to have the YouTube read the document, and we'll skip through the first part and start the
October 1994. To quote the full text, Memorandum on security assurances in connection with Ukraine's accession to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a non-nuclear weapons state, taking into account the commitment of Ukraine to eliminate all nuclear weapons from its territory within a specified period of time, noting the changes in the worldwide security situation, including the end of the Cold War, which have brought about conditions for deep reductions in nuclear forces. Confirm the following. 1. The Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America reaffirm their commitment to Ukraine, in accordance with the principles of the CSCE Final Act, to respect the independence and sovereignty in the existing borders of Ukraine. 2. The Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America reaffirm their obligation to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine, and that none of their weapons will ever be used against Ukraine except in self-defense or otherwise in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. 3. The Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America reaffirm their commitment to Ukraine in accordance with the principles of the CSCE Final Act, to refrain from economic coercion designed to subordinate to their own interests the exercise by Ukraine of the rights inherent in its sovereignty, and thus to secure advantages of any kind. 4. The Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America reaffirm their commitment to seek immediate United Nations Security Council action to provide assistance to Ukraine as a non-nuclear weapons state party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. If Ukraine should become a victim of an act of aggression or an object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. 5. The Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America reaffirm, in the case of Ukraine, their commitment not to use nuclear weapons against any non-nuclear weapon state party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, except in the case of an attack on themselves. their territories or dependent territories, their armed forces or their allies by such a state in association or alliance with a nuclear weapons state. 6. Ukraine, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America will consult in the event a situation arises which raises a question concerning these commitments. This memorandum will become applicable upon signature, signed in 4 copies having equal validity in the Ukrainian English and Russian languages. Budapest.
So this is a very clear statement that Russia gave Ukraine if Ukraine would basically give up all their nuclear weapons. They told Ukraine that if you did that, we'll never invade you. We will never question your sovereignty. We will never change your borders. And they were lying through their teeth. They were. What I was saying in this article is they were lying. And so Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons. Fair is fair. Russia broke all the rules that they said they wouldn't break. So Russia should give them back their nuclear weapons. Pretty simple. That's what should happen. As well as make sure that their borders are the borders that they had in whenever this was, 2015 or whenever. That would be the normal thing that you would expect. You would think that under these circumstances, Ukraine should be able to basically build their own nuclear weapons if they wanted to. And they should simply say, we were given this assurance by the Russians. They violated it. So this whole agreement on our part is null and void. It seems to me that this sounds right. And I'm somewhat disturbed that none of this discussion actually takes place. So anyway, so I did this case. I'm curious. A year ago, it was one environment, and now we've got another environment where we've been very complicit against Ukraine, what with the theft of their natural resources to line Trump's pockets and so forth, which is a violation of sovereignty. We've been doing what Russia's been doing. And what do we expect? We signed 2. This idea that you can do this is pretty terrible. It turns out that Hitler and Stalin, before World War II, or at the beginning of World War II, had signed similar agreements promising not to invade Poland, which then they proceeded to invade together. They gave Poland assurances that they would never do it, and they did it. Hitler was dealt with, but Russia seems to have remained Russia. So there's this question as to whether or not people really understand that, really understand what they're facing. I argue Russia clearly did exactly what they said they would never do in the memorandum. The lie is they were lying when they said that they would affirm they're not attacking. So it's the whole truth said no, the memorandum is complete. It is a very simple, straightforward statement. It doesn't have what's in legal terms called remedies. So it's not a contract in the sense of being a full contract. It's a statement of exactly guarantees that were being made by Russia and the United States and Britain. Was it nothing but the truth? I said that this affirmation is not nothing but the truth. Russia was clearly planning not to follow their promise once they got the nuclear weapons out of Ukraine. We watched them do it. What's the deceit? The deceit is that the lie is manipulating. There's nothing not manipulating about this lie that they told. Is the deceit of truth intended? I said that the lie is absolutely intended by Russia. Part of the proof of that is that they had done this before, and before World War II. They just did it again. It was, people say it was other things, but they did it when they said they wouldn't in writing. What's the motivation behind the truth or lie? I believe the motivation behind the lie by Russia was to buy time so they could conquer and absorb the lands of Ukraine. In other words, they were just trying to buy time and to get those nuclear weapons out of Ukraine. What's the social acceptability? I think this is the most horribly unacceptable lie you could imagine. This should not be tolerated by anybody. It should be outright, call it what it is. They were lying, and the right solution, fair is fair, is give Ukraine nuclear weapons and let Ukraine and Russia work it out with Ukraine armed. But I don't know any other way to do it, except what's happening now, which is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people dying, if not millions. What label would improve the social acceptability of the truth or lie? By the way, in World War II, most all the Russian fighting between Russia and Germany was in the lands of Ukraine, and over 10 million people. This is Snyder's book called Bloodlands, describes this in detail. And the Russians and the Germans starved the population to death, starved the population of Ukraine to death in their war against each other. This is them bull-faced lying in order to buy time so that the Russians could go and take over Ukraine. What label would improve the social acceptability of the truth or lie? I think it was clearly manipulating Ukraine, the U.S., and Britain. But I think that later the U.S. has become complicit in this whole thing too, because they're not taking the right actions that they should be taking to stop Russia, who's in such clear violation of this. That's my view, and I'll go through the jurors to get their verdicts and their summary in 20, 30 seconds. I'm really curious to see what y'all think. Now, this is the case that I ran before, and very interested to see if people have newer views or whatever on this. Juror one.
A couple things here. One, international law is really just contracts. A lot of people don't understand that. There's no such thing as the book of international law. It's just agreements between different countries. And so if the United States and Great Britain sign an agreement and Russia doesn't, Russia's not bound by that agreement. Number two.
But they did sign this agreement, though.
Agreed. What I'm saying is that's point number one. I just want to make the point that international law is just a series of contracts that you're supposed to abide by. Point number two. The vast majority, overwhelming majority of the world, period, outside of affluent West, and by affluent West, the United States, most of Western Europe, northern Europe, believes that power rules everything. End of story. So you sign a contract and you change your mind later? Of course you can. You're powerful. Why not? So the whole idea that Russia or any of the other countries or entities that have the exact same mindset that's been demonstrated historically over, why would you believe anything they ever said? Why would their signature on a piece of paper be meaningful at all? That's such a huge fallacy to believe that to begin with. So that's number two. Number three, I think you're going to have a problem comparing the United States and Russia with regard to their involvement in Ukraine. Should the United States be in Ukraine in terms of taking natural resources? Yeah, probably not, unless it's a joint deal. But the United States cannot intervene militarily in Ukraine without potentially provoking a NATO BRIC military interaction. But by putting contractors and boots on the ground in Ukraine, now if Russia kills Americans who are otherwise there in a peaceful capacity, they are provoking a NATO military response. That's about the best you can do in terms of putting United States boots on the ground without inherently provoking a military response from Russia. So it's complicated. But point one, international law is contract law, but you have to trust. Point two, you have to trust the signatories to contracts are going to care. And point number three, Ukraine is complicated. Thank you.
Yep. Juror 2.
That really complicated me. I don't know enough about this, but from what I read in your information, and I have to agree with you that this turned into a lie. It's maybe started out, but I don't know that they lied from the beginning. I just think it ended up being a lie.
Yeah, my argument is that they knew they were lying at the beginning, but I can see somebody saying that they didn't know that. So there was a kind of a different management in Russia when they signed this.
Yes.
Putin had not completely taken over yet, but he was very definitely part of the process back then. The articles I read is that there were some of the people who controlled Russia were very much a part of this as a lie. And then there were other people who thought that they were telling the truth. So Russia was not one person. Most countries aren't one person. You could argue that when they signed this paper, the guys who signed it from Russia meant it. But it was up to Ukraine to realize that the Russians lie all the time. Shouldn't have done this. They should have kept their nuclear weapons. They were under great pressure from the United States to give them up. But I think actually they knew the history of Russia. And I wish they had not signed this and not given up the nuclear weapons, because that would have changed the.
I'm juror 4.
Juror 4?
Yeah, when it comes to this stuff here, I ran it through Grok, Copilot, and Gemini, and it still was confusing to me. I do have to agree with what Brian said, though, about the contracts and stuff, because I didn't think you could compare, I believe it was Russia to Ukraine. I believe it was. So it's confusing to me. I don't do well with politics somewhat, and especially international ones.
Yeah. So I think you could pretty strongly argue that Ukraine should have said that Russia can't be trusted, refused to sign such an agreement. It never would have been a memorandum if Ukraine had not agreed. And they agreed to this wording, which seemed to give them the assurances. But what was missing from a contractual point of view, what are the consequences of the violation? There was a couple of little violations, like there was one in there where the United States could take it to the United Nations, that's not a very good consequence to stop Russia from doing what it wants to do. They didn't really have a good contract, and people could argue it was a bad contract. They should have realized it, and they shouldn't have given up their, however, but whatever. Juror 5.
Good evening. I'm just going to give a short summary. My stance is also straightforward. I also believe they knew what they were doing at the end of the day. Most countries view these actions as a violation of the memorandum. Russia has tried to justify their actions in several ways, but at the end of the day, Russia promised not to use force against Ukraine's borders, but later use military force and change those borders, which most of the world sees as breaking an agreement.
Yep.
Greetings, everyone. So, in my view, I think Russia ultimately did Ukraine wrong by acting against the commitments it made in the 1994 memo, and its actions clearly contradict its pledge to respect Ukraine's borders. But, however, while the violation itself is evident, I think also Juror 2 mentioned, it cannot be definitely proven that Russia intended from the beginning to break that promise. And therefore, but we can state with confidence that the agreement was broken. It's just that not that it was necessarily premeditated deception from the start. And I would like to go back to what Brian said, that I think in my culture, there's a thing that says a leopard never changes its spots. So if a person is not really trustworthy, whether you enter a contract with them or not, you still have to keep in mind that they might turn over their word, whether it's signed on paper or not. But that is my take on the case. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that we'll all see how this evolves. And it's unclear how it's going to all shake out in the end. But I wish the U.S. was more assertive about the consequences for Russia. I realize the sanctions and so forth, which are real. There's a lot of things that the U.S. has done, but there are other things that I think it could do by way of arming Ukraine and such that they really haven't done. And Juror 7.
Hi everyone. I'll just give a short summary, even though I feel like all the jurors have said what I wanted to say, but I'll just say Russia was wrong because the vast majority of international legal scholars and governments and United Nations members has stated that these actions to be violation of both the memorandum and the broader principle of international law. So even though Russia has argued that memorandum was a political commitment rather than a legal binding, most of international nations have argued that this is not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Juror 8.
There. Okay. On my stance, okay, when I first saw the topic of the case, I was like, okay, this is going to be a very deep one. On what Juror 2 said in terms of them, or basically not knowing whether the Russia would be trustworthy from the beginning, I do think that you never know what's happening behind doors, the things that they discuss in terms of when this contract came about before it was signed. So it's a possibility that Russia might have had a plan or something up their sleeve behind the backs of everyone, basically, and which basically led to the point that we are right now with Russia invading Ukraine and basically breaking what they signed, if I could say it that way. But I do agree with your accusation.
Some of the background that I read on this was pretty clear. So it was that there were people in the Politburo who genuinely were ethical people who were backing signing this thing with good ethics, in other words, truthfully. And then there were others that were sitting back and going ahead and signing it because it would buy them time. They had no intention from the beginning of ever following what the agreement said. Their objective was to reclaim Ukraine as part of Russia as it was in the Soviet Union. It was that's what I read, and it was a believable read. They all agreed to sign it, but it was not all for good reasons. Putin was evidently one of the ones that was calculating and was perfectly happy to sign it, but he didn't mind lying either. That's what I read. So that sounds good. Next week, we've got another trial, which is going to be interesting, and I'm very interested to hear. So my overall take on this is, interestingly, nothing has really changed in this year. So this is like the trial was last March. And everybody agrees that this was a lie. You're dealing with a state where power is everything, which is Russia. And most of the world does work this way, which I agree. There's a component of the world after World War II that tried to bring more reason to things. We've got to somehow create a situation where these sovereign entities are not plotting against each other all the time, so including us. So anyway, so that sounds good. So
All right.
okay, so we'll see y'all next week.
All righty.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.